Good afternoon and welcome to this series of gallery talks at home. My name is Sarah Herring and I'm Associate Curator in post-1800 paintings. Now that it is well and truly summer, I thought it would be lovely to escape to the beach. For some, this has been a possibility, but for many, for a wide variety of reasons, there has been no opportunity to see the sea for a long time. So today, I'm going to bring it to you from my living room. One of the beaches we're going to look at is British. The other scenes were painted in France, the Netherlands, and the last not on the beach at all, but in a studio. All my examples are from the 19th century, beginning with speedily painted and largely uninhabited views, through to scenes painted towards the end of the 19th century, reflecting the explosion in tourism and seaside holidays. My earliest two beaches are by two British artists, John Constable, Weymouth Bay, Bowleaze Cove and Jordon Hill, painted in 1816-17, and Richard Parkes Bonington, an estuary in northern France, possibly that of the River Somme, painted in around 1825-7. Bonington was British, but he spent most of his short life in France, and he was an important linking figure between French and British landscape practice in the early 19th century. Constable, too, was hugely important for the development of landscape painting in France. The Bonington was painted pretty much entirely in the open air. It is very rapidly painted, with sweeping horizontal brushstrokes defining stretches of sand, sea and sky. A fishing boat rests at the right, and a solitary figure of a woman sits on the dunes. I think that Bonington has captured perfectly the pearly luminosity of the coast, the silvery sand, the rippling rays of the estuary. And something which always delights a museum curator, we have found a fragment of shell blown by the wind embedded in the paint surface. The Constable is a winter scene, painted during the artist's honeymoon in Dorset following his marriage to Maria Elizabeth Bicknell. He painted 3 pictures of this bay, this one probably in the open air, or perhaps from the nearby vicarage where they were staying. Like the Bonington, it is broadly and boldly painted, with brownish priming showing through everywhere, particularly in the foreground, where it forms the colour of the sand. In places it is painted very thinly, as in the sea, where strokes of grey and white are laid over the priming. Despite the forbidding clouds, it is a bright scene. Constable has used much white to portray light emanating from behind the clouds, particularly at the left, close to the horizon. Both the Bonington and the Constable are largely empty. There's a lone figure in the Bonington, and in the Constable there's a shepherd and a flock of sheep at the right. They are primarily studies of nature, of sea and sky, and they were painted before going to the beach as recreation became truly popular. In the 18th century, the notion of sea and sea air being beneficial to health emerged, and then, later in the 19th, leisure trips to the seaside became common, leading to the expansion of seaside resorts. Some would stay for weeks at a time. Even so, for many workers, the seaside meant an annual day trip by bus or train. So my next 2 pictures are a reflection of this new popular trend. Eugene Boudin, Beach Still at Trouville, painted in 1873, and Claude Monet, The Beach at Trouville, painted in 1870. Both are set in Trouville, a fashionable resort on the Normandy coast. In the 1860s, Boudin began to paint the well-to-do holidaymakers who flocked there from Paris. And this picture of a frieze of figures strung out along the sand is typical of his work. From the 1870s onwards, his pictures became more freely painted, and this one is no exception. In this detail, you can see that he is not even sketched in the faces, as in the man standing at the back and the seated woman holding her parasol. This is the era before the invention of the folding deck chair, which became popular later in the 19th century. The holidaymakers stand or they sit on the sand, or on these hard wooden chairs, which are essentially upright domestic chairs. A couple are blown over in the wind. This is a common feature of Boudin's work. He often depicted these literally strewn around in front of the sitters. The 2 women in the Monet are also sitting on these chairs, and there's an empty one in the middle, on which is hung a child's beach shoe, perhaps that of Jean, the son of Monet and his first wife Camille, who was the figure on the left. They spent the summer months of 1870 in Trouville. Boudin and his wife were also staying in Trouville at this time, and it has been proposed that the figure on the right is in fact Madame Boudin. Boudin and Monet met in the 1850s, and Boudin encouraged Monet to paint out of doors, which is what he is doing here. This painting is even more broadly painted than the Boudin. The figures are placed right up close to the picture plane, so the bold strokes defining the clothing, the broad white strokes on Camus' dress, appear even more startling. And despite the sky being full of clouds, there's a strong sense of sunlight reflected in these bright highlights, her dress, and the touches of white on the rungs of the chair. I pointed out the shell in the Bonington. Here, it is sand blown onto the surface, visible even to the naked eye, as in this detail from the white brushstrokes on Camus' dress and the sand visible behind the rungs of the chair. Boudin reluctantly acknowledged that it was for his depictions of holidaymakers that he would always be remembered, and he said, "I shall do something else, but I shall always be a painter of beach scenes." But Trouville was also a fishing port, and Boudin did also paint the working fishermen and women. In my next painting by the Dutch artist Jacob Maris, A Beach, painted in the 1870s or 80s, he likewise turns his attention to fishing. Maris was a member of the Hague School, a group of artists who took their inspiration from the Dutch flat landscape, the sea, and the fishing communities. He was born in The Hague and he settled back there in 1871. And this picture was almost certainly painted on the beach in nearby Scheveningen, which had a flourishing herring industry from the late 19th century. But a harbour was not built until the early 20th century, and bluff-bowed fishing boats, as in these two on the right, were pulled up onto the beach when not in use. As with my other examples, it is very broadly painted, as you can see in this detail of the clouds. I think the beach lends itself particularly to bravura brushwork, more so than the kind of delicate brushwork required to depict foliage of trees. I'm reminded of the Constable. Maris paints the beach as a wild, lonely place, with man presented as a prey to the elements. He's not painted a place for relaxed loafing on the sand, even though at this period Scheveningen was also developing as a flourishing seaside resort. Instead, he focuses on the solitary figure of a fisherman hauling a net up onto the beach, and the grey tonality, the vast sky, the white horses on the waves, the clouds, particularly the dark ones at the top, and the whirling birds at the centre, give a sense of freshness and breeze, not without the threat of a storm. For my last painting, I'm going to return to the world of leisure. This is Edgar Degas' beach scene, painted in 1869-70, which is on display at the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin. The young girl in the foreground has been swimming, and her nurse is combing through her wet hair. Her swimsuit is laid out to dry next to her, with the parasol and basket. It is very two-dimensional, and I always feel that it resembles the clothes for a paper dressed-up doll. In 1869, Degas visited the coast of Normandy, where he made a series of pastels of the cliffs and sea. Aspects of this painting are based on these studies, particularly the sea itself and the boats on the horizon, although note that the smoke is blowing in two different directions. Despite being a member of the Impressionist group, Degas was famously averse to painting out of doors, and this painting was absolutely painted in the studio. It is painted in essence on paper, a technique developed by Degas, which entailed the thinning of oil paint to create transparency and luminosity. He painted it on 3 sheets of paper, starting with a central sheet, and he finished with the one at the left, where you can see an evident difference in tone. There's extensive underdrawing, some of which is visible to the naked eye, and it includes large wheel-like shapes visible here in this detail, which might refer to the wheeled bathing machines, which were a common sight on beaches at this period. But for some reason, Degas decided not in the end to include them. So it is a picture in 2 parts, a background based on naturalistic studies and a posed group in the foreground. In many ways, Degas created his own virtual beach. He said, "It is quite simple. I spread my flannel vest on the floor of the studio and had the model sit on it. You see, the air you breathe in a picture is not necessarily the same as the air out of doors." I think that he is saying that you cannot capture the outdoors in a painting, that it is impossible in paint to render the fresh air, the smells and the sounds. Over the last months, we've had a double hit of neither being able to see these pictures in the flesh, nor enjoy the kind of places which inspired them. Instead, in countless ways, we've created our own virtual settings, perhaps through a computer screen, as we are doing now. With the gallery now open, if you are able, you can come again and see these pictures for yourselves. But I also hope that this summer you'll be able to experience in real life what the artists themselves experienced when they captured these scenes, to smell the salty air, listen to the waves, and feel the breezes. If you're interested in learning more about art history, click here or here. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.